In the vast glittering expanse of the Galactic Confederation, humans were considered somewhat of a curiosity. Most species evolved on gentle garden worlds with temperate climates and predictable geological patterns, not humans. No, humans came from what most civilized species considered a certified death trap, a volatile, radiation-soaked planet orbiting an unstable yellow star, with atmospheric conditions that would make most alien species dissolve on contact. The Confederation had a technical term for Earth, Class 9 Death World. The humans had a different term for it. Tuesday, Jack Donovan stood at the viewport of the Confederation diplomatic vessel Harmonious Discord, watching the stars blur past as they traveled at speeds that would make Einstein cry. 6 months into his role as Earth's junior ambassador to the Galactic Confederation, and he still couldn't believe his luck. A kid from New Detroit, the most notorious chemical manufacturing district on the North American continent, now representing humanity among the stars. Ambassador Donovan, your presence is requested in Chamber 3 for the preliminary discussions, chirped the ship's communication system. On my way, Jack replied, straightening his uniform. The Confederation had insisted on providing all diplomatic attire, which meant his ceremonial robes were constructed of a material that felt like a cross between silk and bubble wrap. They claimed it was universally comfortable, which Jack had quickly learned meant mildly irritating to everyone equally. As he walked through the gleaming corridors, various alien species gave him a wide berth, some out of respect, most out of a vague instinctual fear. Humans had developed quite the reputation in their short time on the galactic stage, not as conquerors or warriors, though those stories circulated too, but as bizarre biological anomalies that treated deadly toxins like mild inconveniences and considered radiation exposure a reasonable trade-off for a good tan. "Ah, the human arrives," announced High Counselor Grex, a towering avian being with iridescent feathers and 6 eyes arranged in a perfect hexagon. "Now we can begin the trade negotiations regarding the Zeta Sector mining rights." Jack nodded respectfully, taking his designated seat at the oval table. Around him sat representatives from 12 different species, each more bizarre than the last. To his immediate left was Vecalara, a gelatinous being who communicated through pigment changes and subtle vibrations. They had been Jack's closest ally in these negotiations, primarily because Vecalara's home planet had similar gravitational conditions to Earth, which meant they could actually share a meal without one of them needing immediate medical attention afterward. "Before we begin," rumbled Dornthal, the massive reptilian trade minister, "I must register my species' formal protest at conducting these negotiations aboard a vessel with a human present. Their biology is simply too," he waved a clawed hand dismissively, "unpredictable." Jack fought the urge to roll his eyes. This again, ever since the incident last month when he'd accidentally sneezed in the diplomatic cafeteria, and 3 ambassadors had to be quarantined for decontamination, the reptilian delegation had been insufferable. "Minister Dornthal," Jack replied with practiced calm, "I assure you that human biology poses no threat to these proceedings. The medical team has confirmed that it's not just your microbiome that concerns us," interrupted Zila, a willowy being composed primarily of crystalline structures and bad attitudes. "It's your species' alarming propensity for surviving conditions that would eliminate any reasonable life form." Jack smiled tightly. "We call that adaptability, Counselor. It's served us well." Little did Jack know that at that very moment, 3 decks below, a group of conspirators were preparing to put that famous human adaptability to a most unusual test. 3 decks below the diplomatic chamber, in a maintenance corridor illuminated by flickering purplish light, 3 figures huddled together. Anyone passing by might have mistaken them for technicians discussing a routine repair, but their hushed tones and furtive glances betrayed more sinister intentions. "Is the dispersal system ready?" whispered Knox, a shadowy figure whose species specialized in binary fission and political intrigue. Once the admiral of a now disbanded space fleet, Knox had spent the last decade watching humans carve out an increasingly prominent position in galactic politics. It was concerning. "Yes, Commander," replied Zeal, a technician whose exoskeleton clicked nervously as he manipulated the control panel. "The fear gas will be introduced through the environmental systems during the 4th rotation. By my calculations, it should affect everyone in Chamber 3 within moments." The 3rd conspirator, Malk Vorn, shifted his massive bulk uncomfortably. As a member of the Taurian Guild, his species valued directness in all conflicts. "I still don't understand why we don't simply challenge the human in honorable combat. This chemical warfare seems beneath us." Knox's bioluminescent spots flashed in irritation. "Because you gigantic simpleton, direct confrontation with humans never ends well. Have you learned nothing from the Regelian incident? They sent 1 human mining engineer against an entire Regelian war party, and the human walked away with nothing but a cool scar and awesome story. The fear gas is our best option, added Zeal. Every species, no matter how resilient, has a terror response, even humans. We simply need to trigger it during negotiations, demonstrate their instability, and the trade pact will collapse. What none of the conspirators realized was exactly where Jack Donovan had grown up. New Detroit wasn't just any polluted city, it was the chemical manufacturing capital of Earth. After the environmental collapse of 2087, corporations had consolidated their most hazardous operations in what was once Michigan, creating a sprawling industrial zone where the air itself was a cocktail of compounds that would make a chemist weep. Jack had spent his childhood playing in neighborhoods where gas masks were as common as bicycles, where chemical spills created multicolored puddles that the local kids called rainbow ponds, and where the evening sky turned spectacular shades of purple and green from the refinery's emissions. Back in Chamber 3, negotiations were proceeding with the usual mix of diplomatic pleasantries and thinly veiled threats. The mining rights to Zeta Sector would benefit humanity's expansion plans, Jack was explaining, while our excavation technology would extract resources with minimal environmental impact. Minimal by human standards, sniffed Zila, which, if I may remind the Council, includes planets where the oceans occasionally catch fire. That only happened twice, Jack muttered under his breath. Vukalara rippled sympathetically beside him, their surface shifting to a calming blue pattern. Perhaps we should consider the technical specifications more closely, they suggested, their translator rendering the pigment changes into smooth diplomatic language. High Counselor Grex nodded his feathered head in agreement. Indeed, let us review the environmental impact assessments. He tapped his datapad, bringing up a holographic display of the contested sector. As the display flickered to life, Jack noticed something odd. A subtle change in the air circulation, a faint hiss from the ventilation system, and then, a smell. A distinctive chemical odor that tickled at the edges of his consciousness, triggering a cascade of childhood memories. Summer days playing hide-and-seek in the abandoned chemical plant near his home. The annual Toxic Fog Festival where New Detroiters celebrated the 1 week a year when the atmospheric conditions created a bioluminescent haze across the city. The peculiar tang of his mother's special air freshener that didn't so much eliminate odors as chemically transform them into different, slightly more pleasant odors. Jack took a deep breath, savoring the familiar bouquet of compounds. It was almost nostalgic. Meanwhile, around the table, the effect on the other diplomats was instantaneous and dramatic. Vukalara's entire body turned a sickly yellow as they collapsed into a quivering puddle. Dornthal let out a primal roar and began clawing at the walls, his reptilian brain overtaken by primitive terror. High Counselor Grex's feathers stood on end as he leapt atop the conference table, emitting a high-pitched shriek that threatened to shatter the crystal decanters. Zila's crystalline form vibrated at an alarming frequency, creating a harmonic resonance that made the viewport glass tremble. Two of the smaller delegates had gone completely catatonic, while another had reverted to an ancestral defense mechanism, extruding a thick protective membrane that quickly hardened around their curled-up form. And in the midst of this chaos stood Jack Donovan, human ambassador from Earth, looking mildly confused as he watched his colleagues succumb to absolute terror all around him. "Is someone cooking cabbage?" he asked no one in particular, completely unaffected by the fear gas that was decimating the diplomatic corps of 12 advanced civilizations. 3 decks below, the conspirators watched the scene unfold on their monitors with increasing alarm. "Impossible," hissed Knox, their bioluminescent spots pulsing erratically. "Increase the concentration, the human must be affected." Zeal's exoskeleton rattled as he adjusted the controls. "It's already at maximum safe levels. Any more and it could cause permanent neurological damage to the council members." "Do it anyway," Knox commanded, their multiple eyes fixed on the human who was now awkwardly patting the gelatinous form of Vukalara, apparently attempting to comfort the terrified diplomat. As the concentration of fear gas increased, a thin smile spread across Jack's face. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. "Ah," he sighed with genuine pleasure. "Smells like home." As diplomatic chaos continued to unfold in Chamber 3, Jack's initial amusement was quickly replaced by concern. Whatever was happening clearly wasn't part of standard Confederation protocol, unless diplomat meltdown was a negotiation tactic he'd somehow missed in the briefing materials. "Hey, is everyone okay?" he asked, watching High Counselor Grex attempt to burrow into the ceiling panels. When no coherent response came, Jack tapped his communication badge. "Medical team to Chamber 3, please. We have a situation." His badge emitted only static. That wasn't good. Jack knelt beside the puddle formerly known as Vukalara. "Vukalara, Can you understand me? What's happening? The gelatinous diplomat's surface rippled with jagged patterns of crimson and black. Their translator, struggling to function, managed to convert only fragments. Gas, terror, cannot. Primal fear. Jack's eyes narrowed as understanding dawned. He glanced toward the subtle shimmer in the air near the ventilation ducts, visible now that he was looking for it. Someone had introduced a fear-inducing agent into the room, and somehow he was immune. Growing up in New Detroit had its advantages. The city's unofficial motto was, if it doesn't kill you immediately, you'll eventually develop a resistance. Local doctors had a name for New Detroiters' unique physiological adaptations, industrial evolution. Meanwhile, 3 decks below, the conspiracy was unraveling as quickly as the diplomatic meeting. "This is impossible," Zeal exclaimed, frantically adjusting controls. "I've increased the concentration beyond recommended levels, and the human isn't even sweating." "Something is wrong with your formula," Knox hissed, bioluminescent spots flashing angrily. "The formula is perfect," Zeal insisted, antenna quivering indignantly. "It's specifically designed to target the amygdala or equivalent fear-processing neural structures in all known sentient species. It's working perfectly on everyone else." Malk Vorn, who had been silently watching the monitors, finally spoke. "Perhaps we should consider retreat. If the human discovers..." "Too late for that," Knox interrupted, pointing at the screen where Jack was now methodically examining the ventilation grate. "He knows. Lock down the system and wipe the access logs. We need to move to contingency plan Delta." Back in Chamber 3, Jack had confirmed his suspicions. The chemical compound permeating the room was remarkably similar to the emissions from the Johnston Marley chemical plant back home, the facility responsible for Purple Thursday, an infamous industrial accident that had turned the sky violet for a week and made all food taste vaguely of licorice. Jack grabbed his diplomatic satchel and rummaged through it, pulling out a compact emergency kit. Standard issue for Earth diplomats included not just bandages and antiseptics, but also a miniature chemical analysis kit, another sign of humans' peculiar priorities that baffled other species. A quick scan confirmed what his nose already told him, a sophisticated neurotoxin designed to trigger fear responses, harmless in the long term, but devastatingly effective at inducing temporary terror. For most species anyway. "Never thought I'd be thankful for growing up downwind from Chemical Alley," Jack muttered as he pulled out emergency breather masks. He moved quickly around the room, fitting masks on the incapacitated diplomats where possible. Dornthal required some careful maneuvering. The reptilian had wedged himself behind a decorative column and was hissing threateningly at anyone who approached. The Kalara presented a different challenge, being essentially a sensitive gel. They had no obvious place to attach a breathing apparatus. "Don't worry, I'll figure something out," Jack assured the trembling diplomat, whose translator had given up entirely. As Jack worked, the ship's systems suddenly came to life with a blaring alarm. Red emergency lights bathed the chamber, and a mechanical voice announced, "Security breach detected. Emergency lockdown initiated. All personnel must proceed to designated safe zones." The chamber doors sealed with an ominous hiss. "That's not ideal," Jack said to no one in particular. His communication badge crackled to life, finally connecting. "Ambassador Donovan." It was Captain Trell, the ship's security chief. "We're detecting a chemical attack in your sector. Wait, how are you even conscious right now?" "Long story involving questionable childhood environmental regulations," Jack replied. "Listen, the other diplomats are incapacitated. We need medical teams, and to track down whoever's pumping this gas into the room. Working on it, but ship systems are being tampered with. Someone's locked us out of environmental controls and sealed the diplomatic sector. We're trying to override, but it'll take time." "How much time?" "At least 30 minutes. Jack glanced at the diplomats, some of whom were now exhibiting concerning physiological responses. Zila's crystalline form had begun to develop fracture lines. High Counselor Grex's feathers were falling out in alarming clumps. "They don't have 30 minutes, Captain. I understand, but don't worry, I'll handle it." Jack terminated the connection and took a deep breath of the fear gas-laden air. It really did remind him of summer evenings back home. He approached the ventilation system and began removing the cover plate. If he couldn't stop the gas from coming in, he'd have to find its source. "Okay, New Detroit upbringing, don't fail me now," he muttered as he squeezed his lanky human frame into the ventilation shaft. As Jack crawled through the narrow maintenance ducts, following the increasing concentration of the chemical compound, he heard voices ahead, angry, panicked voices. "Cannot believe the human is immune. This changes everything. We should have gone with poison, simple, reliable poison, and violated the ancient accords. Even we have standards." Zeal, Jack smiled grimly in the darkness of the ventilation shaft. Found them. Jack positioned himself above the maintenance room grate, peering down at the three conspirators through the slats. From his vantage point, he could see the elaborate gas dispersal system they'd rigged to the ship's environmental controls. Amateur hour compared to the industrial-grade systems he'd grown up around, but effective enough to incapacitate most of the diplomatic corps. "We need to evacuate now," Malk Vorn was insisting, his massive form pacing nervously in the confined space. "If the human discovers our involvement, the human is locked in Chamber 3, Knox snapped, though their bioluminescent spots betrayed uncertainty with their erratic pulsing. "By the time security overrides our lockdown, we'll be long gone. The diplomatic damage is already done. Are we certain the human hasn't?" Zeal's antenna twitched anxiously as he glanced upward, almost looking directly at Jack. "Found a way out." "Impossible," Knox dismissed. "The room is sealed. Besides, humans may be surprisingly durable, but they're not exactly known for their technical ingenuity." Jack suppressed a snort. Clearly, Knox had never visited the engineering deck of any human vessel, where the unofficial motto was, "If it can't be fixed with duct tape, you're not using enough duct tape." As he considered his next move, Jack's thoughts drifted back to his childhood in New Detroit, specifically to the summer of 2095, when the Harmon Wesley petrochemical plant experienced what company officials later euphemistically called an atmospheric release event. For 3 weeks, the neighborhood had been blanketed in a peculiar green fog that caused mild hallucinations and temporarily altered everyone's taste buds to perceive everything as tasting like blueberry waffles. While most families evacuated, Jack's father, a stubborn chemical engineer convinced he could science his way through anything, had decided they would stay. "It's educational," his father had insisted, fitting 11-year-old Jack with a makeshift gas mask cobbled together from household items. "Besides, the settlement check will pay for your college." That summer, Jack had learned more about chemical compounds, respiratory protection, and improvised filtration systems than most university students. He'd also developed a remarkable tolerance for airborne toxins that was now, ironically, serving him well in interstellar diplomacy. Below, the conspirators continued arguing about their escape plan, unaware of the human eavesdropping above them. "What about the other diplomats?" Malk Vorn asked, his cultural programming finally asserting itself through his fear. "Some of them could suffer permanent damage if exposed too long." "Collateral damage," Knox dismissed coldly. "They should have been more careful about who they allied with. Humans are dangerous, we're simply demonstrating that fact." "By becoming more dangerous than the humans," Malk Vorn challenged. "Temporary measures for long-term security," Knox replied, their tone suggesting this conversation was far from new. "The Confederation has grown complacent, welcoming these evolutionary aberrations into our midst without considering the consequences." Jack had heard enough. Time to introduce a little chaos of his own. With practiced ease, he removed the ventilation grate and dropped directly into the center of the maintenance room, landing in a crouch between the startled conspirators. "You know," Jack said conversationally, rising to his full height, "where I come from, we usually introduce ourselves before trying to gas someone." The reaction was instantaneous. Zeal screeched in alarm, his exoskeleton rattling violently. Malk Vorn stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of equipment in his surprise. And Knox, well, Knox did what any self-respecting villain would do when confronted unexpectedly. They lunged for the controls. "Don't even think about it," Jack warned, but Knox was already frantically manipulating the dispersal system. "If the fear gas won't affect you," Knox hissed, "perhaps we need something stronger." With a dramatic flourish, Knox activated what appeared to be an emergency override, and a new chemical began pumping through the system. The effect was immediate, a pungent acrid smell that made the air shimmer visibly around the ventilation outputs. "What have you done?" Malk Vorn demanded, backing toward the exit. Knox's multiple eyes gleamed with desperate triumph. "Released our contingency measure, a compound that causes respiratory paralysis in most oxygen-breathing species. If we can't discredit the humans, we'll simply eliminate all witnesses." Jack sniffed the air, his expression more curious than concerned. "Is that chloramine with a hint of methyl mercaptan?" Knox blinked in confusion. "You recognize it? Are you kidding? This smells exactly like the river behind my high school, after they tried to clean up the industrial waste by dumping in counteractive chemicals." Jack chuckled, shaking his head nostalgically. "We used to call it Tuesday water. Good for clearing sinuses and keeping away unwanted conversation partners at lunch." Knox stared in disbelief, as Jack continued to breathe normally, while Zeal began to show signs of distress, his respiratory slits fluttering erratically. "This is getting awkward," Jack said, glancing between them. Look, maybe this is a cultural misunderstanding, but where I come from, attempted mass murder is considered a bit of a social faux pas. You should be choking, gasping for air, begging for mercy. Knox cried, their composure finally cracking. Jack shrugged, sorry to disappoint. But growing up where the air quality was measured on a scale from visible smog to spork dissolves in atmospheres, tends to build character and remarkable lung capacity. He stepped forward, prompting Knox to back against the control panel. Now, I'm guessing you're not authorized to be pumping neurotoxins into a diplomatic meeting, so how about we shut this system down and have a civilized conversation about interspecies relations? Malk Vorn, surprising everyone including himself, moved to stand between Jack and Knox. The human is right, this has gone too far. Traitor, Knox hissed, but their accusation was undermined by their increasingly labored breathing, as their own chemical weapon began affecting them. Not a traitor, Malk Vorn corrected, just someone who recognizes when they've underestimated an opponent. Jack nodded appreciatively. Wise perspective. Now, who wants to help me shut down this system before we all have an even more awkward diplomatic incident on our hands? As Zeal collapsed to the floor, overcome by his own creation, and Knox struggled to maintain consciousness, Jack stepped up to the control panel. The complex alien interface would have been indecipherable to most humans, but Jack's eyes lit up with recognition. Would you look at that? He said with genuine delight. It's almost exactly like the emergency ventilation override at the Chemal plant back home. Dad was right, chemical engineering really is a universal language. With a few confident keystrokes, Jack reversed the airflow, sending the remaining gas into a containment system, rather than into the diplomatic chambers. And that, he announced with satisfaction, is why you should never try to out-pollute someone from New Detroit. Security override complete. Chamber doors unsealing. The mechanical announcement echoed through the maintenance room as Jack finished resetting the environmental controls. The ship's AI had finally regained control of its systems, though not without Jack's unorthodox assistance. Perfect timing, Jack muttered, glancing at the three conspirators. Seal was unconscious, his exoskeleton having initiated some kind of protective stasis. Malk Vorn stood uncertainly near the door, clearly conflicted about his role in the plot. And Knox, this isn't over, human, Knox wheezed, still struggling with the lingering effects of their own chemical weapon. You've proven our point. You're dangerous. Unpredictable. A biological anomaly that shouldn't be welcomed among civilized species. Says the person who just tried to commit mass murder, Jack replied dryly. I think we might have different definitions of civilized. The maintenance room door slid open, revealing Captain Trell flanked by 4 security officers in full environmental suits. The captain took in the scene with professional efficiency, her 4 eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. Ambassador Donovan, she acknowledged, sounding only mildly surprised to find him outside the supposedly sealed diplomatic chamber. I see you've been busy. Just doing my part for interspecies relations, Jack replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. These 3 decided to test a new diplomatic strategy involving neurotoxins and respiratory paralysis agents. Spoiler alert, not very effective. Captain Trell signaled to her security team, who moved to detain the conspirators. The medical team reports all diplomats are responding well to treatment. No permanent damage, though High Counselor Grex may be molting prematurely due to stress. Small price to pay for peace in our time, Jack said, watching as Knox was led away in restraints, still muttering about human biological aberrations. You should report to medical as well, Ambassador, Captain Trell suggested, eyeing him with concerned curiosity. The chemical analysis shows compounds that should have affected even your unusual physiology. Jack waved dismissively. I'll stop by later, right now I'd like to check on the other diplomats. As they walked through the corridors, Captain Trell couldn't contain her professional curiosity. How did you manage to remain unaffected? Our sensors detected at least 3 compounds known to be toxic to carbon-based life forms. Let's just say Earth has been unintentionally preparing its population for chemical warfare since the Industrial Revolution, Jack replied. Where I grew up, these levels would barely register as a moderate air quality advisory. The captain's expression shifted to one of horrified fascination. Your species deliberately pollutes its environment as training, not deliberately. Well, not anymore, Jack clarified. Let's call it an unfortunate side effect of rapid development that had some unexpectedly useful consequences. Evolution works in mysterious ways. When they reached the medical bay, Jack was surprised to find it less chaotic than expected. The diplomats were recovering, though many still showed signs of distress. The Kalara had regained their normal coloration, mostly, with only occasional ripples of anxious yellow disrupting their usual blue-green pattern. Jack, the gelatinous diplomat, burbled upon seeing him. "You're unharmed. We feared the worst when we were evacuated, and you weren't among us." "Takes more than a little toxic gas to keep me down," Jack replied with a grin. Perks of growing up in humanity's chemical playground. Before Vikalara could respond, an alarm blared through the ship. The overhead lights shifted to red, and the ship's AI announced security breach in detention level. All personnel on alert. Captain Trell's communication device chirped urgently. "Captain, the primary suspect has escaped and accessed the weapons locker. They're headed toward the medical bay. Evacuate the diplomats," Trell ordered, drawing her sidearm. "Security team to medical bay immediately." "No time," Jack said, glancing at the still recovering diplomats. "Some of them can't be moved quickly enough." As if to punctuate his point, the medical bay doors slid open to reveal Knox, looking considerably worse for wear, but armed with what appeared to be a retrofitted pressure cannon. "I warned you," Knox said, their voice distorted by the chemical damage to their respiratory system. "Humans don't belong in the Confederation. After today, the Council will understand why." Jack stepped forward, placing himself between Knox and the recovering diplomats. "Let me guess, you're going to prove humans are dangerous by forcing me to be Seems counterproductive. I'm going to prove you're a threat by eliminating you with a weapon designed specifically for human physiology," Knox replied, patting the pressure cannon affectionately. Seal was very thorough in his research. "This contains a compound toxic even to your remarkably resilient species." Jack's eyes narrowed as he recognized the distinctive shimmer of the liquid in the cannon's chamber. "Is that hydrofluoric acid?" Knox's bioluminescent spots pulsed with surprise. "You recognize it? Are you kidding? We used to use that stuff to clean particularly stubborn stains at the chemical plant." Jack shook his head in disbelief. "Though I wouldn't recommend direct exposure. It's not exactly gentle on human skin." "Precisely," Knox hissed, aiming the cannon. "Your knowledge of toxins only proves my point. Your entire species is an evolutionary mistake, a biological weapon disguised as diplomats." Captain Trell moved to intervene, but Jack held up a hand to stop her. "Let me handle this." He took a step toward Knox, then another, maintaining eye contact with the increasingly agitated alien. "Here's what you don't understand about humans," Jack said conversationally. "We didn't evolve to withstand toxins because we wanted to. We did it because we had to, because we made mistakes, because we poisoned our own world before we understood the consequences." Another step forward. Knox's aim wavered slightly. "The reason I know about hydrofluoric acid isn't because I'm some biological weapon," Jack continued. "It's because when I was 14, there was a spill at my father's workplace. 3 people died. My dad spent 6 months in specialized medical care because he rushed in to save his co-workers." Another step. Jack was now close enough to touch the barrel of the pressure cannon. "So yes, I'm resistant to your fear gas. Yes, I can recognize compounds that would kill most species instantly. But not because I'm dangerous, because my species learned the hard way what happens when you don't respect dangerous things." In one swift movement, Jack grabbed the barrel of the weapon and twisted it upward, forcing Knox to either release it or fire harmlessly into the ceiling. The alien chose the former, backing away as security officers finally arrived and surrounded them. "The difference between us," Jack said, carefully disarming the pressure cannon with practiced movements, "isn't that I'm immune to fear. It's that I've learned to work through it. Because sometimes, the most toxic thing isn't a chemical, it's assuming you can't find common ground with people different from yourself." Knox, defeated, allowed the security team to take them into custody. As they were led away, they locked eyes with Jack one last time. "This changes nothing. The Council will still see the truth about humans." "I certainly hope so," Jack replied calmly. "Because the truth is, we've made enough mistakes for 10 civilizations, and we're here to make sure the rest of the galaxy doesn't have to repeat them." 2 days after what diplomatic records would euphemistically label the environmental systems incident, the Confederation Council reconvened. The chamber had been thoroughly decontaminated, though several diplomats still twitched nervously whenever the ventilation system cycled on. Jack sat at the human delegation's table, scrolling through messages from Earth Command. The incident had caused quite a stir back home, with reactions ranging from concern to barely concealed pride that their ambassador had proven so resilient. The New Detroit Tourism Board had already contacted him about becoming their official spokesperson, with a proposed slogan, "New Detroit, where breathing builds character. Ambassador Donovan, High Counselor Grex called, his feathers now mostly regrown, though still somewhat patchy. The council has reached a decision regarding the recent unpleasantness. Jack stood straightening his diplomatic robes. I appreciate the council's swift attention to this matter. Swift is a relative term, muttered Dornthal, who had spent 18 hours in a healing trance to recover from the fear gas exposure. Some of us still taste colors when we exhale. The conspirators have been remanded to their respective governments for judgment, Grex continued. Knox and Zeal face severe penalties for their actions. Malkvorn's cooperation has been taken into consideration for his sentencing. Jack nodded solemnly. After the incident, Malkvorn had provided valuable information about the anti-human movement that had been gaining traction in certain corners of the Confederation, a movement that ironically would now face much closer scrutiny. However, Grex added, the incident has raised important questions about humanity's unique biological attributes. The Council has voted to update diplomatic protocols regarding human representatives. Here it comes, thought Jack. The restrictions, the special containment procedures, the mandatory decontamination chambers that some species had been pushing for since humans first joined the Confederation. Henceforth, Grex announced, all diplomatic vessels carrying human representatives will be required to maintain an emergency supply of Earth-standard atmospheric conditions and chemical compounds. Jack blinked in surprise. I'm sorry, your immunity to compounds that incapacitated the entire council proved invaluable in resolving the crisis, Grex explained. Had you been affected as we were, the consequences would have been considerably more severe. Vikalara's surface rippled with amusement. In other words, Ambassador, your biological peculiarities are now considered a security asset rather than a liability. I don't know what to say, Jack admitted. Perhaps, suggested Zila, who had been uncharacteristically quiet until now, you might explain to the Council exactly how humans developed such remarkable resistances. For security protocols, of course. All eyes turned to Jack expectantly. Even Captain Trell, standing at attention near the chamber entrance, leaned forward slightly with interest. Well, Jack began, fighting a grin, it started roughly 200 Earth years ago, when we discovered that burning massive quantities of fossil fuels made our machines work better but our lungs work worse. For the next hour, Jack regaled the Council with tales of humanity's environmental misadventures. The Great Smog of London, the Love Canal incident, the Texas City refinery explosions, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. With each story, the diplomatic representatives grew alternately more horrified and more impressed. You're saying, Dornthal interrupted incredulously, that humans continued to live in areas they knew were contaminated, voluntarily. Real estate prices drop significantly when the tap water is flammable, Jack explained with a shrug. Some people couldn't afford to leave. Others were too stubborn. My own grandfather used to say he'd built up too much immunity to start over somewhere clean. And your government permitted this? Asked a representative from a species with hive mind tendencies. Initially encouraged it, then regulated it, then spent decades cleaning it up, Jack admitted. We're still working on that last part. By the time he finished describing New Detroit's annual Toxic Fog Festival, complete with its traditional gas mask decorating contest and chemical spill obstacle course, several council members were discreetly taking notes. This explains much about human diplomatic behavior, Grex concluded, smoothing his remaining feathers thoughtfully. Your species approaches negotiations with unusual flexibility. When your homeworld tries to kill you on a semi-regular basis, Jack replied, you develop a certain adaptability. As the council session concluded, the Zeta Sector mining rights, the original purpose of the meeting before chemical warfare had derailed proceedings, were granted to the human delegation with surprisingly little opposition. Whether this was due to newfound respect or lingering trauma-induced compliance, Jack wasn't entirely sure. Vikalara accompanied him as he left the chamber. You realize, they said, their translator conveying amusement, that you've fundamentally altered the Confederation's perception of humanity. For better or worse, Jack asked. Both, I imagine. Several species are already filing requests to update the classification of Earth from Class 9 Death World to Class 10 Nightmare Realm. Jack laughed. Wait until they hear about Australian wildlife. As they walked toward the ship's observation deck, Captain Trell approached them with a datapad. Ambassador, we've received a communique from Earth Command. They're requesting samples of the fear gas compound. Let me guess, Jack sighed. For research purposes. They specifically mentioned potential applications for entertainment destinations called haunted houses. Captain Trell replied, clearly bewildered. Is this a mistranslation? Sadly, no, Jack admitted. just humans being humans. Later, alone at the viewport watching the stars, Jack dictated his official report on the incident. After detailing the factual elements, he concluded with a personal observation: in the end, what saved the diplomatic mission wasn't special training or technology, it was the unintended consequence of humanity's most significant mistakes. Our resilience comes not from strength, but from surviving our own folly. Perhaps that's the most human trait of all, the ability to breathe deeply in environments that should by all reasonable measures kill us instantly. He paused, watching a nearby star system grow larger as the ship altered course. Postscript, he added with a smile. Recommend all future diplomatic missions include representatives from New Detroit, Pittsburgh, or Beijing. Their lungs alone qualify as strategic assets. 3 weeks later, the Confederation's updated diplomatic handbook included a new emergency protocol titled, "In case of chemical attack, deploy the human." Jack received a complimentary copy, along with a personalized breathing apparatus from V. Kalara that was entirely decorative. A diplomatic inside joke that would confuse humans and aliens alike for generations to come. And somewhere on a distant world, in a maximum security detention facility, Knox was still trying to understand how their perfect plan had been foiled by a species crazy enough to consider chemical exposure a cultural experience. Some lessons, it seemed, were universal after all.